The radar screen glowed green in the darkness. A single dot pulsed on the display. 8 kilometers. Moving southwest at 21 knots. Admiral Nathaniel Vance stood motionless before the screen, heavy spectacles reflecting the phosphorescent light. Without them, he was nearly blind. With them, he saw everything that mattered. Behind the Washington, the night sky burned orange. The battleship South Dakota was on fire. 27 shells had found her in the last 10 minutes. 2 American destroyers had already gone down. 78 men dead in the black water. The bridge was silent except for the steady ping of the radar. The green dot on the screen was the Japanese battleship Kirishima. 14,000 tons of steel, 8 massive guns, invisible in the darkness. Vance's executive officer shifted nervously beside him. "Sir, we can't see the target." Vance didn't look up from the screen. "I can see it." His finger traced the glowing contact. "Fire." 9 16-inch guns erupted as one. The Washington shuddered. The sound was like the end of the world. The shells flew into pure darkness. No muzzle flash to aim at. No silhouette against the sky. Just numbers on a screen and faith in a technology most of the Navy didn't trust. How does a nearly blind man sink a battleship in total darkness? The answer began 30 years earlier with an explosion that should have destroyed him. This is the story of a man who turned a crippling defect into a weapon, who fought his own navy harder than he ever fought the Japanese, who saved Guadalcanal with a machine that admirals called a waste of money, and who proved that in the dark vision is the least important sense of all. Kentucky, 1900. The coffee can sat in the dirt between 2 boys. 12-year-old Nathaniel Vance crouched 5 feet away, hands over his ears, grinning. His older brother Samuel held the match flame dancing in the summer breeze. They'd packed the can with black powder stolen from their father's hunting supplies. The fuse was a twisted length of cotton string soaked in kerosene. It looked professional. It looked safe. Samuel lit the fuse and ran. The string hissed and sparked. Both boys ducked behind the woodpile, waiting for the explosion. 5 seconds passed. 10, 20, nothing. "You packed it wrong," Samuel said. "I packed it exactly like the book said." Then the fuse went out. Nathaniel stood up, brushing dirt from his knees. The can sat there, smoking slightly, mocking them. "I'm going to check it." "Don't be stupid." But Nathaniel was already walking toward it. 12 years old and absolutely certain he knew everything. The fuse had clearly gone out. The powder was clearly inert. This was clearly safe. He picked up the can, peered inside. The world became light and pain. The explosion lifted him off his feet and threw him backward. Black powder fragments peppered his face like 1,000 tiny knives. His hands came away from his eyes, covered in blood. He tried to scream but couldn't find air. Samuel was screaming enough for both of them. The doctor arrived an hour later. By then, Nathaniel's face had swollen to twice its normal size. His eyes were sealed shut with burns and blood. "He'll be blind," the doctor said, not bothering to lower his voice. "Both retinas are damaged. Even if the swelling goes down, he'll never see clearly again." Nathaniel's father sat beside the bed, perfectly still. He was a circuit judge, a man who'd sentenced 3 men to hang without his voice wavering. Now his hands shook. "Never. Best case, he'll have partial vision, enough to navigate a room, not enough to read, certainly not enough for any kind of precision work." The irony would have been funny if it weren't so cruel. The Vance family lived for precision. Nathaniel's father was a competitive shooter. His grandfather had been a surveyor. His uncle made watches. And now Nathaniel would be lucky to see shapes. For 3 weeks his eyes stayed bandaged. He lay in the dark and listened to the house creak, counted his heartbeats, measured time by the church bells that rang every hour. When they finally removed the bandages, the world was a blur. His mother's face was a smudge of color. The window was a rectangle of light. The clock on the wall was unreadable, but he could see. Not well, not clearly, but enough. "You'll need spectacles," the doctor said. "Very strong ones, and even then your vision will never be normal. Learn to live with limitation, boy. It's the only choice you have." Nathaniel was 12 years old. He'd just lost half his vision to his own stupidity. Any reasonable child would have learned caution. Instead, he learned focus. If he couldn't see the broad picture, he'd see the details that mattered. If he couldn't track a bird in flight by watching the sky, he'd learn to predict where it would be. If he couldn't aim by sight alone, he'd aim by mathematics and feel. 2 months after the accident, wearing lenses so thick they looked like bottle bottoms, Nathaniel shot his first bird. A crow 30 yards away, taken down with a single point .22 caliber round. His father watched the bird fall and said nothing for a long moment. Then, "How?" "I didn't watch the bird. I watched where it was going." The defect that should have ended everything had forced him to see differently, and seeing differently, it turned out, was seeing better. By the time he was 16, he was the best shot in 3 counties, not despite his damaged eyes, because of them. But the Navy had rules, and rules didn't care about irony. Annapolis in 1904, the Naval Academy didn't want him. The admissions officer looked at the medical report and shook his head before Nathaniel even sat down. "Son, you understand what you're asking for?" "I'm asking to serve my country, sir." "With vision this poor, you'd be a liability." Nathaniel placed a piece of paper on the desk, a letter of recommendation from his father, a certificate from the National Rifle Association, and scores from the Kentucky State Shooting Championship. First place. Perfect score. The officer read them, then looked up. "These are impressive, but they're shooting scores, not naval qualifications. A rifle range isn't a ship's deck. You need good eyes for—" "I have good eyes, sir, just not normal ones." "That's not how the Navy sees it." "Then the Navy is wrong." The silence that followed was the kind that could end careers before they started. The officer's jaw tightened. His hand moved toward the rejection stamp. Then he paused. "The vision test is in 3 days. If you pass it, I'll consider your application. If you fail, this conversation never happened. Understood?" Nathaniel understood perfectly. He spent the next 72 hours memorizing eye charts, patterns, sequences. He couldn't see the letters clearly, but he could memorize the order. Left eye, EFPTOZ, right eye, PEZOLCFT. On test day, he walked into the examination room with absolute confidence. The doctor pointed to the chart. "Read line 3. Nathaniel rattled it off perfectly, not because he could see it, because he'd memorized it. Line 5. Perfect again. Line 8. He hesitated for half a second. Line 8 was smaller, harder to memorize, but then delivered it flawlessly. The doctor made a note. "Your vision is borderline but acceptable. You're cleared for service." It was a lie. Nathaniel's vision was terrible, but it was a lie in service of a greater truth. He could shoot better than anyone in the building, see or not. He was in. The other midshipmen noticed him immediately, partly because of his heavy spectacles, partly because of his last name. "Vance," one of them said on the first day. "That's almost like Wang, you Chinese. Kentucky. You sure those glasses make you look like you're from the Orient?" The nickname stuck anyway. Within a week they were calling him Owl, not just because of the lenses, but because he seemed to see things in the dark that no one else could. During night navigation drills, while other midshipmen squinted uselessly into the blackness, Nathaniel would stand at the rail and point. "Boy, 15 degrees starboard, 200 yards. How the hell can you see that?" "I can't, but I can hear the bell, and I know how far sound travels over water." He didn't see better. He thought better. His academic record was mediocre. Naval history bored him. Engineering was tedious. He showed up to classes, did the minimum required, and spent every spare moment at the shooting range. By his senior year, he was the best marksman in academy history. In April 1907, he qualified to represent the Navy at the National Rifle Association Championship in Ohio. 684 shooters, the best in the country, military and civilian alike. Nathaniel was 19 years old, wore spectacles so thick his teammates joked he was shooting blind, and didn't care what anyone thought. The rifle event was at 1,000 yards, a distance so far that wind temperature, humidity, even the rotation of the earth became factors. Most shooters missed by feet. Nathaniel's first shot hit 2 inches from center. His second hit 1 inch from center. His third, fourth, and fifth shots punched through the same hole. Perfect score. By noon, he won the gold before lunch. Someone from the pistol competition approached him afterward. "You shoot handguns?" "Not really." "Want to try?" It was a stupid idea. Nathaniel was a rifle specialist. Pistols required completely different muscle memory, different breathing, different stance. He'd fired maybe 50 rounds from a handgun in his entire life. But he was 19 and had just won a national championship and felt absolutely invincible. Sure. The pistol event started an hour later. Nathaniel borrowed a Colt .45 from a Marine Corps shooter and stepped up to the line. His first shot was wild. Second was better. By the fifth, he'd found the rhythm. Then his pistol exploded, not metaphorically. The chamber ruptured from overpacked ammunition, sending metal fragments into his right hand. Blood poured between his fingers. The crowd gasped. Nathaniel looked at his hand, then at the target, then at the referee. "Can I continue?" "Son, you need a medic." "I need to finish." Someone handed him a bandage. Someone else handed him a different pistol. Nathaniel wrapped his bleeding hand, switched the gun to his left hand, the hand he'd barely trained with, and fired the remaining rounds. Not perfectly. His score was lower than the leader's, but he hit the target. Every single shot. The crowd was silent when he finished. Then they erupted. He won the pistol gold too. The first person in American history to win both rifle and pistol championships in the same national competition. With damaged eyes and a wounded hand, the newspapers called him a prodigy. His instructors called him reckless. He called it proving a point. Back at Annapolis, he showed up to graduation with 2 gold medals and absolute certainty he'd be commissioned immediately. Then came the final physical exam. The doctor, a different one this time, looked at his medical file and frowned. "Your vision is below standards." "I passed the entrance exam." "This exam is more thorough." The doctor held up a chart. "Read line 6. Nathaniel couldn't. The letters were a blur. He'd memorized the entrance exam chart, but this was different, new. "I can't." "Then you can't be commissioned." The room tilted. 2 national championships, 4 years of training, and now this. "I can shoot better than anyone in this academy. That's irrelevant. The Navy requires minimum visual acuity. You don't meet it. I'm sorry." Nathaniel stood there, gold medals in his pocket, and felt the future collapse. Then a voice from the doorway. "I'll vouch for him." Captain Thaddeus Marlowe stepped into the room. 46 years old, barrel-chested, with a grey beard that made him look like a prophet from the Old Testament. He'd served in the Spanish-American War, commanded 3 ships, and had a reputation for being the hardest man in the fleet. He also happened to be the senior instructor for gunnery. "Captain, his vision is good enough. I've watched him shoot. He hits targets at ranges most men can't even see. If his eyes are broken, they're broken in a useful direction. Regulations are clear. Regulations are written by people who've never been in combat. I have, and I'm telling you, this man is an asset, not a liability." The doctor hesitated. Marlowe didn't. "Commission him." "Commission? If there's a problem, it's my responsibility." 3 days later, Nathaniel Vance graduated with his class. Ensign, United States Navy, assigned to the USS New Hampshire as a probationary officer. The night before he left Annapolis, Marlowe found him on the firing range. "You know why I vouched for you?" "Because I'm a good shot, sir." "No, because you see what others don't." Marlowe lit a cigar, the ember glowing in the twilight. "Most men aim with their eyes, you aim with your mind. That's rare, and it's going to matter more than you think." "How so, sir?" The future of naval warfare isn't about who has the best eyes, it's about who has the best information. Telescopes, rangefinders, and soon, things we can't even imagine yet. Technologies that let you see without seeing. Nathaniel didn't understand. Not then, but he would. 7 years later, in the mud and blood of Veracruz, Mexico. Veracruz, 1914. The bullet cracked past Nathaniel's head and punched into the wall behind him. He didn't flinch. Instead, he listened. The sound had come from the left. Second story, maybe third. A flat crack, not a sharp snap, which meant the shooter was using a rifle, not a pistol. Nathaniel sat down in the middle of the street, cross-legged, rifle across his lap, completely exposed. Behind him, 3 Marines crouched behind a wagon, staring at him like he'd lost his mind. "Sir, you're going to get killed." Nathaniel didn't answer. He was listening. The Mexican Revolution had dragged the United States into another border conflict. A diplomatic incident in Tampico had escalated into a full invasion of Veracruz. The Navy and Marines had landed expecting light resistance. Instead, they got snipers, dozens of them, hidden in buildings on rooftops behind windows, picking off American soldiers as they tried to advance through the narrow streets. The Marines couldn't shoot back. They couldn't see the enemy. Every time someone tried to move, another shot rang out. The advance had stalled completely until Nathaniel Vance decided to solve the problem. Another shot. This one hit the cobblestones 2 feet to his right, spraying stone fragments. Nathaniel's eyes tracked the sound. Second-story window, adobe building, 40 yards away. He could barely see the window itself, let alone anyone inside it. But he didn't need to see them. He raised his rifle, aimed at the window, waited. The sniper fired again. The muzzle flash was barely visible, a flicker of light in the shadows, but it was enough. Nathaniel squeezed the trigger. Through the scope, specially ground for his terrible vision, he saw the figure in the window jerk backward and disappear. One down. The Marines were shouting at him now, but he ignored them. He was in the zone, that perfect state of focus where sound became data and data became targets. Another shot from a different direction. Rooftop, east side. Nathaniel swung his rifle, fired. The shooter on the roof tumbled forward and fell into the street with a wet thud. 2 down. The pattern repeated. A shot would come from the shadows. Nathaniel would track it by sound and muzzle flash. Return fire. Watch the enemy fall. By the time Captain Marlowe arrived, Nathaniel had been sitting in that street for 40 minutes. 12 confirmed kills, not a scratch on him. Marlowe walked up casually as if strolling through a park. "Vance, you're either the bravest man I've ever met, or the stupidest." Nathaniel stood up, brushing dust from his uniform. "Neither, sir. I just let them shoot first. And if they'd hit you, they're aiming at a stationary target from 100 yards with iron sights and adrenaline. Their odds were poor." Marlowe stared at him for a long moment. Then he laughed, a deep, booming sound that echoed off the buildings. "You calculate probability under fire. Most men trust instinct, you trust mathematics. You said that once before, sir, that I don't aim with my eyes. I'm saying it again because it's important. Most men think warfare is about strength or courage. It's not. It's about information. Who has it? Who can use it? You just sat in the open and turned yourself into bait because you understood that hearing the shot is better than trying to see the shooter." "Yes, sir." That's going to matter more in the future. Technologies are coming that will change everything. Radio, rangefinders, maybe even ways to see in the dark or through fog. The Navy doesn't understand that yet, but they will. Marlowe put a hand on Nathaniel's shoulder. "When that day comes, I want you to be ready." After Veracruz, Marlowe wrote 3 letters of recommendation. One to the Bureau of Personnel, one to the Secretary of the Navy, one directly to the President. All 3 said the same thing. Ensign Nathaniel Vance has vision problems, but he sees better than anyone in the fleet. Promote him. The response came back 2 weeks later. Denied. Visual acuity below standards. Marlowe crumpled the letter and threw it in the trash. Idiots. Nathaniel stood in the doorway of Marlowe's cabin. "It's fine, sir. I'll serve as an ensign. It's enough." "It's not enough. You're wasted on routine patrols. You should be innovating, teaching, changing how we think about combat. The Navy doesn't want innovation from someone who can barely see." "Then the Navy is blind." Marlowe sat down heavily. For the first time, Nathaniel noticed how tired the captain looked, lines around his eyes, grey creeping into his beard faster than it should. "I'm retiring next year," Marlowe said quietly. 47 years old, and they're putting me out to pasture. The new generation doesn't want old men telling them how to fight modern wars.
You're not old, sir. I'm obsolete, but you're not. You're the future Vance, even if you don't know it yet. Marlowe pulled out a flask, took a drink, and offered it to Nathaniel. "Promise me something." "Sir, when the time comes, and it will come when you have to choose between what's easy and what's right, choose right, even if it costs you everything." Nathaniel took the flask, drank. "I promise, sir." He didn't know then what that promise would cost.
Didn't know he'd spend 20 years fighting his own navy harder than he ever fought the enemy. But he'd made the promise. And Nathaniel Vance kept his promises, even the ones that destroyed him. Antwerp, Belgium, 1920. The rifle felt like an extension of his body. Nathaniel lay prone on the shooting mat, cheek pressed against the stock, breathing slow and steady. The target was 300 meters away, a tiny circle of white against a hillside. Wind gusted from the left at 8 miles per hour. Temperature was 62 degrees, humidity 30%. All factors, all calculated. The Olympics, 7 years after Veracruz. Nathaniel was 32 years old now, still an ensign, because the Navy refused to promote anyone with defective vision. Still the best shot in the American military. Still proving over and over that broken eyes didn't mean broken aim. This was the rifle final, 10 shooters, 5 rounds each. The Swiss competitor beside him had just scored 98 out of 100. Nearly perfect. Nathaniel's turn. First shot. He squeezed the trigger between heartbeats. The rifle bucked. Downrange, the target snapped back. The spotter called out, 10. Perfect center. Second shot. Same result. Third shot. The wind shifted. Nathaniel adjusted half a degree left. Fired. 10. Fourth shot. A cloud passed over the sun, changing the light. Nathaniel blinked behind his spectacles, recalculated, fired. 10. Fifth shot. The crowd had gone silent. A perfect score was rare. 5 consecutive bullseyes at 300 meters with iron sights was the stuff of legend. Nathaniel breathed out slowly, let his heart rate drop, felt the wind on his cheek, squeezed. The rifle cracked. Downrange, the target rang like a bell. 10. Perfect score. The crowd erupted. Nathaniel stood up, removed his glasses, wiped them clean. Around him, photographers scrambled for position. Reporters shouted questions. He ignored them all. This was the 5th gold medal in 7 days. Rifle, pistol, team events, running deer. By the time the Olympics ended, he'd won 7 medals total, 5 gold, 1 silver, 1 bronze, a record that would stand for 60 years. The American team carried him off the range on their shoulders, cheering. Nathaniel let them, but his mind was already elsewhere. In the crowd, he'd seen a face. Captain Marlowe. Retired now, but still watching, still caring. That night, they met in a cafe near the Olympic Village. Marlowe looked older, greyer, thinner, but his eyes were still sharp. 7 medals, Marlowe said. You've proven your point. The Navy will have to promote you now. They won't. They have to. You're a national hero. I'm a freak with bottle-bottom lenses who can shoot well. That doesn't change regulations. Marlowe leaned back, studying him. You're angry. I'm tired. Good. Angry men change things. Tired men quit. Which are you? Nathaniel didn't answer immediately. He stared into his coffee, watching steam rise. I don't know anymore. I've spent 12 years proving I can serve, and every time they find a new reason to hold me back. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am a liability. Nathaniel. Marlowe's voice was sharp. Look at me. He looked up. You are not a liability. You are the most dangerous man I've ever trained. Not because you can shoot, because you can think. And the Navy is going to need that more than you realize. Why? Marlowe pulled a newspaper from his coat, folded to an inside page, a small article about a British inventor named Robert Watson Watt, who was experimenting with radio waves to detect objects at a distance. Read this. Nathaniel scanned the article. It was technical, theoretical, something about bouncing radio signals off solid objects and measuring the return time. I don't understand. You will. This is the future of warfare, Nathaniel. Not eyes, not even telescopes. Machines that can see through fog, through night, through anything. They're calling it radio detection and ranging. Some are shortening it to radar. Radar? It's experimental now, unreliable, but in 10 years, 20, it will change everything. And when it does, the Navy is going to need people who understand that vision isn't about eyes, it's about information. Marlowe leaned forward. You've spent your whole life learning to see without seeing, to aim by calculation instead of sight, to trust data over instinct. That's exactly what radar will require, and when the time comes, you'll be the only one ready. Nathaniel looked at the article again, the words blurred behind his lenses. You really believe this? I know it, and I know you're the man who'll prove it. They sat in silence for a long moment. Outside, the streets of Antwerp were celebrating the Olympics. Inside, two men discussed a future that didn't exist yet. Finally, Nathaniel spoke. If I do this, if I fight for this technology, the Navy will destroy me. You know that. Yes. They'll call me insubordinate, reckless. They'll block every promotion, make my life hell. Yes. And you still think I should do it? Marlowe smiled, a sad, tired smile. I think you don't have a choice. Men like us don't get to choose easy paths. We get to choose right ones. Nathaniel thought about that, about Veracruz, about 12 Mexican snipers who'd learned that vision wasn't everything, about a future where machines might see better than human eyes ever could. All right, he said quietly. I'll do it. Good. Marlowe stood up, leaving money on the table. Then let's get to work. We have a war to prepare for. What war won't the next one? It's coming faster than you think. Marlowe walked out into the night. Nathaniel sat alone staring at the article about radar. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang midnight. The future had arrived, and Nathaniel Vance was finally ready to see it. Washington, D.C., 1939. The office smelled like old leather and older grudges. Admiral Cornelius Hargrave sat behind a desk the size of a small ship, fingers steepled, expression carved from granite. He was 63 years old, had served in the Navy for 42 years, and believed with absolute certainty that machines were making sailors weak. Across from him, Captain Nathaniel Vance stood at attention. 51 years old now, still wearing those heavy spectacles, still an outsider despite 2 decades of service. The Navy had finally promoted him to captain, but only after Marlowe's death, and only because the headlines from the Olympics had made it politically impossible not to. Hargrave looked at Vance's service record with obvious distaste. You've been assigned to the Bureau of Ships, Preparations Division. Your job is to ensure the fleet is ready for war. Yes, sir. Your job is not to waste my time with experimental nonsense. Vance said nothing. His face was perfectly neutral. Hargrave leaned forward. I've read your file, Captain. You have a reputation for unorthodox thinking, for questioning authority, for pushing technologies that haven't been proven. He paused. That ends now. We have protocols, procedures, systems that have worked for 100 years. You will follow them. Am I clear, Corp? Crystal clear, sir. Good. Dismissed. Vance saluted and turned to leave. At the door, Hargrave's voice stopped him. One more thing. I knew Captain Marlowe. He was a good officer, but he had strange ideas about the future of naval warfare. Ideas about machines replacing men. I assume he filled your head with similar nonsense. Vance turned back. He taught me to see clearly, sir. Then see this clearly. The United States Navy is built on the judgment of experienced officers, not gadgets. Remember that. Vance left the office and walked down the marble corridors of the Navy Department building. Through windows he could see the Potomac River, grey water under grey skies. War was coming to Europe. Everyone knew it. And when it came, America would be dragged in eventually. The question was whether they'd be ready. In his briefcase, Vance carried a folder. Inside the folder was a report from the Naval Research Laboratory, 18 pages of technical data about a new radio-based detection system, radar. Marlowe had been right. The technology existed now, crude, unreliable, but functional. The British were already installing it on their ships, using it to detect aircraft and surface vessels in fog and darkness. The American Navy was ignoring it. Vance walked into his new office, a windowless room in the basement, and sat down at a metal desk that had probably been salvaged from a decommissioned cruiser. On the wall, someone had hung a picture of Admiral Hargrave. Vance took it down and replaced it with a photograph of Marlowe. Then he opened the radar report and began to read. The war started that way, not with guns, with reading. The Bureau of Ordnance, 1940. The meeting room was full of men who didn't want to be there. Vance stood at the front beside a chalkboard covered in diagrams. Before him sat 12 officers from the Bureau of Ordnance. Half of them were reading newspapers. The other half looked openly bored. "Gentlemen," Vance began, "I want to talk about radar." Groans rippled through the room. "We've heard this before," someone muttered. Vance ignored him. "Current fire control systems rely on optical rangefinders. They work in daylight, in clear weather, against visible targets." He pointed to the chalkboard. "Radar works in darkness, in fog, in rain, at ranges exceeding 25 miles. That's farther than the human eye can see, even from a masthead." "It's also unreliable," said Commander Ernest Whitmore, a heavy-set man with a face like a bulldog. "The sets break down constantly, the readings are inconsistent, and they require specialized operators." "All true," Vance said, "in 1940, but technology improves. If we invest now—" "Invest what?" Whitmore stood up. "Money we don't have, time we can't spare, training for equipment that might not work when we need it. The British are using it. The British are desperate. We're not yet." Vance felt his jaw tighten. This was the fourth meeting in 6 months. Same arguments, same resistance. The Navy had built its reputation on gunnery and seamanship, on officers who could judge range by eye and lead targets by instinct. Radar threatened that. Not because it didn't work, but because it worked too well. "Gentlemen, in a night engagement, the side with radar will have a 5-mile advantage. They'll see the enemy before the enemy sees them. Fire first, maneuver first, win first." "If the equipment works," Whitmore said. "It will work if we make it work. And if it doesn't, we've wasted millions of dollars and trained our crews on systems they can't trust. No thank you, Captain." The meeting ended the way they all did, with polite dismissal and no decisions. Vance walked back to his basement office and sat in the dark for 20 minutes. Then he picked up the phone. "Get me the British naval attaché." The voice on the other end hesitated. "Sir, that requires approval from—" "I don't care. Get him." 2 hours later, Vance was sitting in a Georgetown restaurant across from Commander Arthur Blackwell, Royal Navy. Blackwell was 45, lean, with the weathered look of a man who'd spent most of his life at sea. "You want to buy our radar sets?" Blackwell said. It wasn't a question. "If the United States Navy won't build them, I'll buy them from someone who will." Blackwell smiled. "You know that will cause a political incident." "Let it. Maybe it'll embarrass the right people into action." "Or get you court-martialed," Vance shrugged. "I'm already blocked from promotion. What else can they do to me?" Blackwell studied him for a long moment. "Captain Marlowe spoke highly of you. Before he died, he wrote me a letter, said you were the only American officer who understood what was coming." "Marlowe wrote to you?" "Several times. We served together in 1918. He was convinced that the next war would be won by information, not firepower. Seems he found a protege who agrees that—" Vance looked down at his coffee. The mention of Marlowe still hurt. The old captain had died 2 years ago, quietly in his sleep. No fanfare, no headlines, just an obituary in the Navy Times that misspelled his name. "I made him a promise," Vance said quietly. "I'd fight for what's right even if it cost me everything. And they're fighting back." Blackwell leaned forward. Then fight harder. You want radar, I'll sell you 10 sets. Newest model. But it has to be official. I can't just hand over British military equipment to one rogue captain. How do I make it official? Force their hand. Make it so expensive to say no that saying yes becomes the cheaper option. Vance thought about that. An idea began to form. Dangerous. Possibly career-ending. Perfect. Thank you, Commander. Don't thank me yet. You're about to make a lot of powerful enemies. I already have. Blackwell smiled. Then what's a few more? The memo hit Admiral Hargrave's desk 3 days later. It was short, 2 paragraphs, and absolutely infuriating. Request for procurement, 10 Type 271 radar sets from British Royal Navy. Estimated cost $2.3 million. Purpose evaluation and training for potential fleet-wide implementation. Approval authority. Bureau of Ordnance. Submitted by Captain N. Vance, Bureau of Ships. Hargrave read it twice, then called Vance into his office. What the hell is this? Vance stood at attention. A procurement request, sir. For British equipment, without authorization, without consultation. You went around the entire chain of command. The chain of command has been unresponsive to previous requests, sir. I'm simply exploring alternative solutions. You're committing insubordination. I'm doing my job, preparing the fleet for war. Hargrave stood up, face reddening. Your job is to follow orders, Captain, not to make policy decisions above your rank. Then make the decision, sir. Approve or deny, but make it. I deny it, obviously. On what grounds? On the grounds that I'm your superior officer and I said so. Vance pulled out a folder, placed it on Hargrave's desk. This is a cost analysis. If war comes and we don't have radar, our destroyers will be operating blind in night engagements. Historical data from the Great War suggests night combat produces a 30% casualty rate for the side without detection advantage. The fleet has 200 destroyers, 30% casualties equals 60 ships. Average crew 300 men, that's 18,000 sailors. Hargrave stared at the numbers. Versus, Vance continued, $2.3 million for equipment that might save them. Sir, you can deny this request, but when those 18,000 men die, because we couldn't see in the dark, their blood is on your hands, not mine. The silence that followed was arctic. Finally, Hargrave spoke. Get out of my office. Sir. Out. Vance left. 2 weeks later, the procurement request was approved, not by Hargrave, by the Secretary of the Navy who'd received an anonymous letter detailing the cost analysis and CC'd every major newspaper in Washington. The letter was signed, a concerned officer. Hargrave knew exactly who'd sent it, but he couldn't prove it. The radar sets arrived in March 1941. Vance personally oversaw their installation on 3 destroyers, trained the crews himself, ran exercises in Chesapeake Bay proving that yes, you could detect ships in fog, yes, you could track aircraft at night, yes, it worked, the results were undeniable. Hargrave denied them anyway. Impressive in controlled conditions, he told a congressional committee, unproven in actual combat. The Bureau of Ordnance recommends further testing before fleet-wide implementation. Translation. We'll drag this out until everyone forgets about it, but Vance wasn't done. The Proximity Fuse, 1941. The device sat on Vance's desk like a mechanical egg, 3 inches long, metal casing, inside a miniature radio transmitter and receiver. A tiny Doppler radar that could detect when a shell was near an aircraft and detonate automatically. No direct hit needed, just proximity. It was revolutionary, and the Bureau of Ordnance wanted nothing to do with it. Too complex, Commander Whitmore said, examining the fuse with obvious skepticism. Too many failure points. And you're asking us to put these in every anti-aircraft shell in the fleet? Yes. What happens when they malfunction, when they detonate prematurely and kill our own crews? We test them, we refine them, we make them reliable. That could take years. Then we start now. Whitmore set the fuse down carefully. Captain, I understand your enthusiasm for new technology, but the Navy doesn't adopt weapons systems that aren't 100% reliable. Nothing is 100% reliable. Exactly. So until this reaches that threshold, it never will. No technology ever does. You're setting an impossible standard to justify inaction. Whitmore's expression hardened. I'm setting a responsible standard to prevent American sailors from dying because we rushed untested equipment into combat. And I'm trying to prevent American sailors from dying because Japanese aircraft blow them out of the water while we're still aiming manually. Me. They stared at each other across the desk. Finally, Whitmore stood up. I'm denying your request for fleet-wide implementation. You can continue testing on a limited basis, but no mass production, no general deployment. That's murder by bureaucracy. That's my decision. Good day, Captain. After Whitmore left, Vance sat alone in his office. On the wall, Marlowe's photograph stared back at him. Choose right, the old captain had said, even if it costs you everything. Vance picked up the phone. Get me the White House. The operator laughed. Sir, I can't just... I'm not joking. Get me someone in the president's office. Tell them it's about saving American lives. 3 days later, Vance was sitting in a basement office in the West Wing, across from a junior aide who looked about 19. You have 5 minutes, the aide said. Vance put the proximity fuse on the desk. This will save thousands of lives. The Bureau of Ordnance is blocking it because they're afraid of new technology. I need someone to force their hand. And you think the president... I think someone in this building understands that when war comes, we need every advantage we can get. This is an advantage. Use it. The aide picked up the fuse, turned it over. What does it do? Vance explained. Doppler radar, automatic detonation, no direct hit required. When he finished, the aide was silent for a long moment. Then, wait here. He left with the fuse. Vance sat alone in the office for 2 hours. When the aide returned, he looked shaken. The president wants to see it demonstrated. We're arranging a test firing at Aberdeen Proving Ground next month. If it works, you'll get your production order. And if the Bureau of Ordnance refuses to cooperate, the aide smiled thinly, then they'll be explaining to the president why they're blocking a war-winning technology. Your 5 minutes are up, Captain. You should leave before Admiral Hargrave finds out you were here. Vance stood. He already knows he has spies everywhere. Then you're a braver man than I am. No, just a more desperate one. The test firing happened on a cold day in October. 23 officials attended, including Admiral Hargrave, who stood in the back with his arms crossed and his expression promising retribution. The target was a drone aircraft, radio-controlled. Flying at 3,000 feet, traditional anti-aircraft fire required a direct hit. Statistically, it took an average of 2,000 rounds to bring down one aircraft. The proximity fuse only needed proximity. The first shell exploded 30 feet from the drone. The shrapnel shredded the target. It tumbled from the sky in pieces. 1 shot, 1 kill. The second test was identical. So was the third. By the fourth, even Hargrave's expression had changed, not to approval, to resignation. After the demonstration, the senior official from the White House approached Vance. The president is authorizing immediate production, 500,000 units to start. More if needed. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. Thank whatever God you pray to that this worked. If it hadn't, you'd be facing court-martial for going around the chain of command. I know. Do you, Captain, you've made enemies at the highest levels of the Navy, men who don't forget and don't forgive. This victory today is going to cost you. Maybe not now, but eventually. Vance watched the wreckage of the drone being collected from the field. As long as it saves lives, I'll pay the cost. The official walked away. Hargrave walked past without speaking, didn't even look at Vance, but the message was clear. This wasn't over. The Aircraft Carrier Prophecy, 1939. The conference room was full of admirals. Vance was the only captain present. He'd been invited to present on fleet modernization. What he was about to say would either change history or end his career. Possibly both. Gentlemen, he began, I want to talk about aircraft carriers. Polite interest. Carriers were popular now, fast, mobile, able to project power across oceans. Specifically, Vance continued, I want to talk about why we should stop building battleships and build carriers instead. The room went silent, then erupted. Outrageous. Battleships are the backbone of the fleet. Carriers are support vessels. Vance waited for the shouting to die down. In 1918, aircraft were novelties. In 1939, they're weapons. In 1949, they'll be the dominant force in naval warfare. Battleships are floating fortresses designed to fight other battleships. But future wars won't be won by battleships dueling at 20 miles. They'll be won by aircraft striking at 200 miles. Pure speculation, said Admiral Raymond Calhoun, a man who'd spent 30 years on battleships and couldn't imagine any other way to fight. Is it the Japanese are building 6 fleet carriers, the British are building 4, we're building 2, and using the rest of our budget to build Alaska-class cruisers that are already obsolete before they're launched? Those cruisers are designed to hunt enemy raiders, and carriers can hunt them faster from farther away with greater striking power. Gentlemen, we're preparing to fight the last war. The next war will be different. Calhoun stood up. Captain Vance, you've been pushing experimental technologies for years. Radar, proximity fuses. Now you want to abandon our most powerful ships in favor of unproven theories. I want to win the war that's coming. By gambling everything on aircraft. By accepting reality. Battleships are magnificent, beautiful, powerful, and doomed. The moment an aircraft can carry a torpedo, the battleship became a target, not a weapon. The room exploded again. This time, no one waited for silence. Vance stood at the front, watching careers and friendships fracture in real time. Finally, Admiral Hargrave spoke, his voice cut through the chaos like a knife. Captain Vance, you are dismissed. Sir, I haven't finished. You're finished. Leave, now. Vance gathered his notes and walked out. In the hallway, he leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. He'd just committed career suicide. But he'd spoken the truth. Inside the room, the argument continued for 3 more hours. When it was over, the vote was recorded. Recommendation: suspend Alaska-class cruiser construction, redirect resources to aircraft carrier production. Vote 9-7 in favor. Vance's proposal had passed by 2 votes. Admiral Hargrave voted against it, and he never forgave the man who'd forced it through. But the carriers were built, Essex-class, fast, deadly, 24 of them by 1945, and they won the Pacific War, exactly as Vance had predicted. The emergency stamp, 1940, the document sat on Vance's desk. Request for radar installation on USS Enterprise, standard priority, expected processing time 6 to 8 weeks. 6 to 8 weeks. In 6 to 8 weeks, the ship would be at sea. The window for installation would close. The equipment would sit in a warehouse while the Enterprise sailed without it. This had been happening for months. Every radar request, every equipment upgrade, every technological improvement, all of them routed through the Bureau of Ordnance where they died, slow deaths in paperwork. Vance had tried working within the system. The system was designed to prevent change. So he changed the system. From a print shop in Baltimore, he ordered a custom stamp. Red ink, 2 inches across. Emergency of emergencies. It wasn't official, wasn't authorized, wasn't even real. But it looked real, and in a bureaucracy that ran on paperwork, looking real was enough. Vance stamped the Enterprise request and sent it through. It was approved in 6 hours. He stamped 14 more requests that week: radar installations, proximity fuse deliveries, training program authorizations, all approved. Within a month, the red stamp was appearing on documents across the Navy Department. Officers who'd never met Vance were using it to bypass the normal channels to get things done. The system was circumventing itself. It couldn't last. On a Thursday morning in November, Admiral Hargrave walked into Vance's office without knocking. He dropped a stack of documents on the desk, all of them marked with the red stamp. What is this? Vance looked up calmly. Procurement authorizations, sir. Authorizations you have no authority to make. I have authority to request equipment for fleet readiness. You have authority to request, not to approve, and certainly not to create fraudulent authorization stamps. Vance met his eyes. Is it fraudulent if it's getting ships ready for war? It's fraudulent if it's not real. This stamp doesn't exist in any official capacity. You invented it. Yes, sir. That's forgery. I could have you court-martialed. You could, but then you'd have to explain to Congress why you're prosecuting an officer for trying to prepare the fleet for war while you've been blocking those same preparations for 2 years. Hargrave's jaw tightened. You think you're clever. I think I'm desperate, and desperation makes people creative. It makes people reckless. Sometimes reckless is what's needed. They stared at each other across the desk. Finally, Hargrave picked up the stamped documents. I'm confiscating these, and I'm ordering you to cease using any unauthorized approval stamps. If I catch you doing this again, court-martial or not, you're finished. Understood? Yes, sir. Hargrave left. Vance waited exactly 1 day, then pulled out a second stamp, identical to the first. He'd ordered 3 from the print shop, just in case. The war with the bureaucracy continued. Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. The phone rang at 6:47 a.m. Vance picked it up, still half asleep. Captain Vance. The voice on the other end was shaking. Sir, this is Lieutenant Bradford at Navy Communications. We've just received a message from Pearl Harbor. They're under attack. Japanese aircraft, hundreds of them. Vance sat up. When? Now, sir. It's happening right now. He was dressed and out the door in 3 minutes. By the time he reached the Navy Department, the building was in chaos. Officers running, phones ringing, someone crying in a stairwell. The reports coming in were catastrophic. Battleships sinking, aircraft destroyed on the ground, thousands dead. Everything Vance had warned about, everything he'd fought to prepare for. And they hadn't been ready, not ready enough. He stood in the communication room watching teletype reports roll in. USS Arizona sunk, USS Oklahoma capsized, USS West Virginia on fire, USS California sinking. The battleship fleet, the backbone of American naval power, destroyed in 2 hours. Someone grabbed his arm. Commander Whitmore. Your carriers, Whitmore said. His face was pale. The ones you pushed for, they weren't at Pearl. I know. They're all we have left. If you'd been wrong about carriers, if we'd kept building battleships instead. He didn't finish. He didn't have to. The carriers had survived because they'd been at sea, and now they were the only capital ships America had left in the Pacific. Vance's gamble had saved the fleet, but it didn't feel like victory. Around him, officers were shouting, planning, organizing. The United States was at war now. Everything would change. Vance walked to his office, closed the door, sat in the dark. On his desk, the phone rang. He picked it up. Captain Vance. Silence, then a voice, weak, wheezing. Nathaniel. He recognized it instantly. Captain Marlowe. I'm dying. Don't argue, just listen. Vance gripped the phone. Marlowe continued each word, clearly painful. You were right about everything. Radar, carriers. The bureaucrats tried to stop you. You didn't let them. Sir, I'm proud of you. Your father would be proud, but the hardest part is coming. What do you mean? Fighting the enemy is easy. They're over there. You can see them. Fighting your own side, that's the real war, and it never ends. Vance heard labored breathing. Nathaniel, promise me one more thing. Anything. When you get your ship, when they finally give you command, trust your calculations, not your instincts. Sir, you've spent your whole life learning to see differently. Don't forget that when the shooting starts. The future isn't about eyes, it's about information. Another long pause. Goodbye, son. The line went dead. Vance sat holding the phone for 5 minutes before he realized Marlowe was gone. The man who'd saved his career. Who'd believed in him when no one else would. Who'd taught him that vision wasn't about eyes. Gone. Vance hung up the phone carefully, stood, walked to the window. Outside, Washington was transforming into a wartime capital. Soldiers marching, trucks moving, the entire nation mobilizing. Somewhere in the Pacific, Japanese forces were celebrating their victory, and somewhere in that same ocean, American aircraft carriers were preparing to strike back. Vance made a silent promise to the old captain. "When I get my ship, I'll prove you right. I'll show them that machines can see better than men, that radar can win wars, that the future you predicted is here, and I'll do it by trusting calculation over instinct, just like you taught me." USS Washington, November 1942. The battleship was beautiful, 700 feet long, 35,000 tons, 9 16-inch guns that could hurl a shell 23 miles, and covered in radar. Vance stood on the deck looking up at the superstructure. Antennas bristled from every level: the Mark 8 fire control radar, the SG surface search radar, the SK air search radar. The Washington was the most technologically advanced battleship in the fleet. And it was his. After 2 years of fighting the bureaucracy, he'd finally been given command. Not because they wanted to reward him, because they'd run out of experienced officers and had no choice. Admiral Hargrave had signed the orders personally, without comment. The message was clear: you wanted this, now prove it. Vance intended to. He spent 11 months turning the Washington into a weapon, not just a ship, a precision instrument. The fire control tables provided by the shipyard were wrong. He'd suspected it for years. Now he proved it. He spent 4 months recalculating every table, factoring in air resistance, powder temperature, barrel wear, even the rotation of the Earth. He drew new charts by hand, tested them in live fire exercises. The results were astonishing. In one drill, he had a destroyer sail to 10 miles, then fired a shell to land precisely in the destroyer's wake. Not ahead, not behind, in the wake. The shell splashed 40 feet behind the ship. The destroyer captain radioed back, voice shaking, "Sir, you almost hit us." Vance replied, "If I'd wanted to hit you, I would have." He trained the gun crews obsessively, not to operate the 9 guns as a single battery, but as 9 independent rifles. Each gun had its own crew, its own firing solution, its own responsibility. One afternoon, a young sailor approached him on deck. Gunner's mate, 3rd Class Hank Dalton, 20 years old, from a ranch in Montana, joined the Navy to escape poverty and see the world. "Sir, can I ask a question?" Vance looked up from the chart he was studying. "Go ahead." "How do you aim when you can't see the target?" "The radar sees it." "But you can't see the radar." "I mean, you can see the screen, but you can't see what the radar is seeing. How do you trust it?" Vance removed his spectacles, cleaned them carefully. "Dalton, I've been nearly blind since I was 12. I've spent my entire life trusting things I can't see. Mathematics, calculations, instruments. The radar is just another instrument. But what if it's wrong? What if your eyes are wrong? Distance, speed, angle. The human eye misjudges all of them, especially at night, especially in combat." He put his glasses back on. "The radar doesn't get tired, doesn't get scared, doesn't panic. It just reports what's there. That's more reliable than any human eye, including mine." Dalton thought about that. "My father never trusted machines, said a man should rely on himself." "Your father ever fight a night battle at sea?" "No, sir." "Then he doesn't know what he's talking about. In the dark, the man who trusts machines beats the man who trusts his eyes, every time." Dalton nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." As he walked away, Vance returned to his charts. But the conversation stayed with him. Trust, that's what it came down to. The Japanese trusted their eyes, their night fighting experience, their superior training in visual combat. The Americans trusted radar. Soon, very soon, they'd find out which trust was justified. Somewhere north of Guadalcanal, a Japanese fleet was steaming south, and the Washington was going to meet them, in the dark, where eyes didn't matter, where only the machines could see. Vance looked at Marlowe's photograph, which he'd hung in his cabin. "Trust your calculations," the old captain had said. Vance smiled. "I will, sir. I promise." The battle was 3 days away. and Nathaniel Vance was finally ready. Iron Bottom Sound, November 13th, 1942, 2100 hours. The water was black as oil. USS Washington cut through the darkness at 25 knots, her bow wave glowing with phosphorescence. Behind her, the battleship South Dakota followed in formation. Around them, 4 destroyers spread out like hunting dogs. Task Force 64, 2 battleships, 4 tin cans. That was all that stood between the Japanese and Guadalcanal. On the bridge, Vance stood before the radar repeater watching green lines sweep across the circular screen. The SG radar painted everything within 20 miles. Islands, reefs, weather cells, and somewhere out there the enemy. Intelligence reported a Japanese fleet heading south. Battleship Kirishima, heavy cruisers Atago and Takao, light cruisers, destroyers, coming to bombard Henderson Field and destroy the marine airstrip that was bleeding Japan's supply lines dry. Vance's orders were simple: stop them. His executive officer, Commander James Breckinridge, stood beside him. 42 years old, Annapolis graduate, good officer, but like most of the Navy, he'd spent his career trusting his eyes, not machines. "Sir, we're entering Iron Bottom Sound." The name was earned. Dozens of ships lay on the bottom here, American, Japanese, Australian, the naval graveyard of the Guadalcanal campaign. Acknowledged. Vance checked his watch. 2113. The Japanese fleet should be approaching from the north. If the intelligence was right, if their timing was accurate, if 100 variables broke the right way, in war variables rarely cooperated. All ahead standard. Come right to 045. Formation will execute arc maneuver clockwise pattern radius 3 miles. The Washington's bow swung right. The fleet followed, creating a moving search pattern that would cover the northern approaches to the Sound. Now they waited. Vance had spent 20 years preparing for this moment. 20 years fighting bureaucrats and doubters. 20 years proving that radar could replace eyesight. In 90 minutes, he'd find out if he was right, or if 1,800 men would die because he'd trusted machines over instinct. The bridge was silent except for the hum of equipment and the whisper of ventilation. Outside, the night was absolutely dark. No moon, cloud cover at 2,000 feet, visibility less than 2 miles, perfect conditions. For the side, with radar. 2,248 hours. Contact, bearing 350, range 18,000 yards, multiple targets. The radar operator's voice was calm, professional. He was 19 years old and had been tracking phantom signals all evening. But this one was different. Vance moved to the scope. 5 distinct phosphorescent blips, moving south at 20 knots, exactly where the Japanese fleet should be. Classification: 2 large contacts, battleship and heavy cruiser signatures, 3 smaller contacts, light cruisers or destroyers. Breckinridge leaned over the plot. Should we challenge them? No. If it's the Japanese, we already know their intent. If it's friendly forces, they're not supposed to be here. Vance straightened. Battle stations, all weapons hold fire. I want a perfect firing solution before we commit. Alarm bells rang throughout the ship. Men scrambled to stations they'd rehearsed 1,000 times. Damage control teams sealed compartments. Gunners loaded shells that weighed more than a man. The Washington transformed from a ship into a weapon. Vance watched the radar contacts close. 16,000 yards, 14,000, 12,000. The Japanese couldn't see them yet. Their lookouts were scanning the darkness with binoculars, searching for masts and silhouettes. Finding nothing, the Washington had complete tactical surprise. This was what Marlowe had predicted, what Vance had fought for, what radar made possible: information dominance. Seeing the enemy before they saw you? Main battery, prepare to engage contact Alpha. Light cruiser, range 11,000 yards. Solution computed, guns ready. Vance's finger hovered over the firing key. One press, 9 16-inch shells. The Japanese would know they were here. The battle would begin. He pressed. Thunder. The Washington's main battery erupted in a wall of flame. The bridge shook. The noise was physical, a pressure that squeezed the chest. 9 shells arced into the darkness at 2,500 feet per second. Everyone on the bridge held their breath. The radar operator watched his scope. Salvo over. Target maneuvering. Damn. All batteries, continuous fire, walk the salvos onto target. The secondary guns joined in. 5-inch batteries, hammering away at 12 rounds per minute. The sky lit up with muzzle flashes. Behind them, South Dakota opened fire too. For 30 seconds it was beautiful. A perfect demonstration of radar-directed gunnery. Shells falling around the Japanese light cruiser Sendai, forcing her to turn away. Then everything went to hell. 2,321 hours. The destroyer Preston exploded. One moment she was maneuvering at 30 knots. The next, she was a column of flame visible for miles. Vance spun from the radar. "Report! Preston is hit. Multiple hits. She's..." The radio cut off in a burst of static. On the radar, the American destroyer formation was disintegrating. The Japanese had spotted them in the gun flashes and counterattacked with everything they had. Destroyer Walk took a torpedo amidships. The radar contact split into 2 pieces, then faded. Destroyer Benham staggered out of formation, trailing smoke. In 3 minutes, the American screen had been shattered. "Sir, South Dakota is maneuvering out of formation." Vance looked at the radar. The battleship was turning hard to port, trying to avoid the burning wrecks of the destroyers. Then her contact flickered and vanished. "South Dakota has lost power. Electrical failure." Without power, the South Dakota was blind. Her radar was dead. Her fire control was dead. She was drifting through a night battle with no way to see the enemy. Breckenridge's voice was tight. "Sir, we need to support her." "Negative. We maintain course. If we expose ourselves now, we lose our radar advantage." "But maintain course, Commander, that's an order." It was the hardest order Vance had ever given. The South Dakota was dying. Her radar had failed at the worst possible moment. Japanese ships were closing on her like sharks on blood. In minutes, she'd be overwhelmed. But if the Washington broke formation to help, she'd be silhouetted against the burning destroyers. The Japanese would see her, target her. The radar advantage would evaporate. Vance had to choose: save one ship now, or trust the plan and maybe save them all later. He chose the plan. "Come left to 270, increase speed to 27 knots. Take us around the western edge of the engagement. Stay in the dark." The Washington turned away from the battle, away from the burning ships, away from men screaming in the water, into the darkness where the radar could see and the enemy could not. 2,347 hours. Gunner's mate Hank Dalton crouched in gun turret 2, listening to the thunder of battle outside. The turret was sealed, armored, safe. It felt like a coffin. Through the communication system he could hear fragments of radio chatter, ships burning, men dying. The destroyers had been torn apart, and the Washington was running. No, not running, maneuvering. At least that's what the captain said. Dalton had grown up on a ranch in Montana. When coyotes attacked the herd, you didn't maneuver. You fought. You grabbed your rifle and you killed the threat. This felt like hiding. The turret officer's voice crackled over the intercom. "All guns stand by. Target bearing 090. Range 8,000 yards. We're engaging the Japanese battleship." Dalton's hands tightened on his station controls. Finally, the waiting was over. 2,350 hours the South Dakota was burning. Not catastrophically, not yet, South. But she'd taken 27 hits from Japanese shells. Her superstructure was on fire. Her after turret was disabled. She'd lost power twice and barely gotten it back, and she was perfectly visible. The burning destroyers Preston and Walk lit up the night like beacons. The South Dakota was silhouetted against them, a massive target that every Japanese ship could see. Kirishima's searchlights snapped on, brilliant white beams that turned night into day. They found the South Dakota and held her. Battleship in sight. Attack. The Japanese heavy cruisers, Atago and Takao, opened fire. 14-inch shells, 8-inch shells, 5-inch shells, all of them hammering the South Dakota from 6,000 yards. It was a firing squad. On the Washington's bridge, Vance watched the radar. The South Dakota's contact was surrounded by Japanese ships. She was fighting back, her secondary batteries still firing, but she couldn't last. Then the Japanese searchlights illuminated something else. The battleship Kirishima. 14,000 tons, 8 14-inch guns, the pride of the Japanese fleet, and completely focused on the South Dakota, not looking to the west, not watching the darkness, not expecting a second American battleship to be hunting them with radar. Vance's voice was absolutely calm. Main battery target, battleship bearing 095, range 8,200 yards. Solution computed.
Near fire. 2,359 hours. The 9 guns of the Washington spoke as one. In the fire control room, petty officers tracked the fall of shot on radar. The shells flew through absolute darkness. No one could see the target. No one could see the shells. Only the radar knew where they were going. First salvo over. The shells landed beyond Kirishima. Correction. Down 400 yards. Fire. Second salvo. This time the radar showed something beautiful. Multiple impacts on target. On Kirishima's bridge, Captain Iwabuchi was directing fire against the South Dakota when his lookout screamed. Battleship ahead! Too late. The first shell hit Kirishima's forward superstructure. It punched through armor like paper and detonated inside, turning the foremast into shrapnel. The blast destroyed both forward gun turrets. Men died before they knew they were in danger. The second shell hit the steering room. Water flooded in. The rudder jammed hard to port. Kirishima began to turn in circles. Slowing, losing steerage, she fired back blindly. Her after-turrets swung toward where they thought the Washington was. 8 14-inch guns roared. The shells screamed through the darkness and missed, not by much. The Japanese gunners were excellent, but they were aiming by eye in total darkness at a target they couldn't see. The shells passed 20 feet over the Washington's superstructure, so close that men on deck felt the wind of their passage, but close didn't count. On the Washington's bridge, Breckinridge let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "My God, they didn't touch us!" Vance watched the radar. Kirishima was circling now, out of control. Her contact was flickering, unstable. "Continue firing. All batteries. I want that ship on the bottom." The Washington's guns hammered away, shell after shell after shell. The range was so close now that even the 5-inch secondary batteries could reach. They poured fire into Kirishima like a man beating a dying animal. It wasn't mercy, it was necessity. A wounded battleship could still fire, could still kill. Vance had seen too many defeated ships rally and strike back. He wouldn't make that mistake. Kirishima's superstructure was a mass of flames now. Her forward magazine had flooded to prevent detonation. She was listing to starboard, dead in the water, but still firing. Her after turrets got off 3 more salvos before they were silenced. Every shell missed, not because the Japanese gunners were poor, because they couldn't see what they were shooting at. Vision, that's what it came down to. The side that could see won. The side that was blind lost. At 0002 hours, November 15th, Vance ordered ceasefire. The Washington's guns fell silent. On the radar, Kirishima was motionless, burning. Her contact was fading as she settled lower in the water. Damage report. Breckinridge checked with all stations. "No hits, sir. No casualties. Minor damage to radar antenna from muzzle blast. Being repaired now." No hits. The Washington had just sunk a Japanese battleship and taken no damage in return, because she could see in the dark, and the Japanese could not. 001. 5 hours, November 15. The Japanese heavy cruisers Atago and Takao realized, too late, that there was a second American battleship. They fired torpedoes blindly in the Washington's general direction, long lance torpedoes, deadly accurate when aimed properly, but they weren't aimed, they were guesses.
The Washington's radar spotted the torpedo wakes. Vance calmly ordered course changes that took them clear. The torpedoes passed harmlessly astern. "Sir, Japanese fleet is withdrawing. All contacts moving north." Vance watched the radar contacts pull away. The Japanese had had enough. They'd lost a battleship, failed their mission. And somewhere in that darkness was an American ship they couldn't see, but that could see them. Admiral Kondo, commanding the Japanese fleet, made the only rational decision: retreat. On the Washington's bridge, someone started to cheer. Breckinridge cut him off. "Belay that. We still have men in the water." He was right. The destroyers Preston and Walk had gone down with most of their crews. 78 men dead, dozens more swimming in oil-slicked water screaming for help. Vance's voice was quiet. "Signal all ships. Commence rescue operations. I want every man we can save." He walked to the bridge wing and looked out at the darkness. Somewhere out there, the South Dakota was limping away, battered, burning, but alive. Somewhere out there, the Kirishima was sinking. There was 1,200 Japanese sailors going down with her, and somewhere out there, 78 American sailors were already dead. The price of victory. Hank Dalton found him there 20 minutes later. "Sir, permission to speak." Vance didn't turn around. "Granted." "Those men on Preston and Walk, we could have helped them if we'd engaged earlier, if we hadn't stayed in the dark so long." "Yes." "Then why didn't we—" Vance finally looked at him. Behind the lenses that barely corrected his vision, his eyes were exhausted. "Because if we'd engaged earlier, we'd be on the bottom too. The Japanese would have seen us, targeted us. We'd have lost the radar advantage. 2,000 men would be dead instead of 78. But those 78 died doing their job, screening the battleships, drawing fire. They knew the risks. So did I when I ordered us to hold position." Vance's voice was flat, empty. "I chose to save 1,922 men at the cost of 78. That's not a choice any commander wants to make, but it's the choice I made." Dalton stood silent. "Does that make you feel guilty, sir?" "Every day. But guilt doesn't change mathematics. 78 dead is a tragedy. 2,000 dead is a catastrophe. I chose the lesser tragedy. My father would have said we should have fought, not calculated. Your father never commanded men in combat. I have. And I'm telling you, the commander who fights with his heart loses. The commander who fights with his head wins, even when winning feels like losing." Dalton looked out at the dark water. Somewhere out there, rescue boats were pulling men from the ocean. Some would live, some wouldn't. "Captain Marlowe told you that—" Vance shook his head. "No. Marlowe told me to trust calculation over instinct. Everything else I learned the hard way." He turned back toward the bridge. "Get some rest, Dalton. We'll be at station until dawn." "Yes, sir." Alone on the bridge wing, Vance removed his spectacles and rubbed his eyes. 78 men. He could see their faces, their service records, their hometowns. Baker Robert, age 22, Des Moines, Iowa. Davis John, age 24, Augusta, Georgia. Fletcher William, age 19, Portland, Maine. 78 names he'd memorized before the battle. 78 men who'd trusted him to make the right call. He'd made the right call, but it still felt wrong. Behind him, the bridge door opened. Breckinridge. "Sir, message from Admiral Halsey. Well done, Washington. Return to base." "Acknowledged." "There's more, sir. Reconnaissance reports the Japanese transport fleet turned back. They won't be able to reinforce Guadalcanal. Henderson Field is safe." The mission. They'd completed the mission. Vance put his glasses back on. "Set course for Espiritu Santo. All ahead, standard." "Aye, aye, sir." The Washington turned south, leaving Iron Bottom Sound behind. On the bridge, someone had posted the casualty list. 78 names from Preston and Walk, 0 names from Washington. Vance read them all, then went to his cabin and sat in the dark for 3 hours. He didn't sleep. Espiritu Santo, November 18th, 1942. The ceremony was brief. Admiral William Halsey stood on the deck of the USS Washington and pinned the Navy Cross on Vance's chest. The crew was assembled. Dress whites, rigid attention, Halsey's voice carried across the deck. For extraordinary heroism in action against enemy forces, Captain Nathaniel Vance demonstrated exceptional tactical judgment and leadership, resulting in the sinking of the Japanese battleship Kirishima with no loss to his own ship. Polite applause. Vance stood perfectly still. The medal felt heavy. Afterward, the crew wanted a speech. Vance looked at the assembled men, young faces, old faces, men who'd trusted him in the dark. He spoke one sentence: "You want this medal? I'll wear it." Then walked off the deck. In his cabin he found a letter waiting. From Admiral Hargrave, it was short. "Captain Vance, your tactics at Guadalcanal were unorthodox and risky. They succeeded through sound planning. I acknowledge that radar proved its value in night combat. I have approved installation of improved radar sets on 47 additional vessels. Respectfully, Admiral C." Hargrave. No apology, no admission of being wrong for 2 years. Just a grudging acknowledgement of reality. Vance filed the letter away. He'd won. Not just the battle, the war within the war, the fight to make the Navy accept that machines could see better than men. Radar was now standard equipment. Proximity fuses were in production. Aircraft carriers had become the primary striking force. Everything Marlowe had predicted, everything Vance had fought for. And it had only cost him 78 men. That evening, Vance wrote a letter home. His wife Martha had been waiting for 2 years. Every time a ship returned to port, she wondered if this would be the time he didn't come back. He wrote, "Dearest Martha, we won. But it doesn't feel like winning. 78 men died. I knew their names. I let them die because the mathematics said it was necessary. You married a man who could see. I'm becoming a man who only calculates. I miss you.
I miss believing that doing the right thing would feel right. All my love, Nathaniel." He sealed the letter, but never sent it. In 1946, after his funeral, Martha found it in his desk drawer, unopened, unsent. She read it once, then burned it. Some pain, she decided, wasn't meant to be shared. USS Washington, 1943 to 1945. The Washington never fought another surface battle, not because there weren't battles, because there weren't enemy battleships left to fight. By mid-1943, the Japanese had lost most of their heavy units. Kirishima, Hiei, Kongo, Mutsu, the great battleship duels that admirals had dreamed about for decades, never materialized. Instead, the Washington became what Vance had always predicted ships would become: an escort, an anti-aircraft platform, a radar picket. She spent the rest of the war protecting aircraft carriers. The carriers launched strikes. The Washington shot down Japanese planes with her radar-directed guns and proximity-fused shells. It wasn't glorious, but it worked. By 1945, the kamikaze attacks had become the greatest threat to the fleet. Suicide planes diving out of the sun, overwhelming defenses through sheer numbers. The proximity fuse saved thousands of lives. Every shell that detonated near an aircraft instead of having to hit it directly meant more planes shot down, more ships saved, more sailors who went home alive. Hank Dalton, made warrant officer, became an instructor for radar operation, taught a new generation of sailors how to trust machines over their eyes. The Washington's gunnery accuracy became legendary. Not because her crew was superhuman, because her equipment was superior and her doctrine was sound. Information, technology, calculation, the future Marlowe had seen, the future Vance had built. In August 1945, Vance received orders to report to Washington, D.C. The Navy wanted him to study kamikaze defense tactics, develop new countermeasures, share his expertise. He packed his belongings, said goodbye to the Washington's crew, boarded a transport plane heading east. He never arrived. August 25th, 1945. The heart attack was sudden.
One moment Vance was reviewing documents, the next he was on the floor chest, screaming, vision narrowing. The corpsman reached him in seconds. Tried everything. Oxygen, morphine, CPR. Nothing worked. Nathaniel Vance died at 14:47 hours. 57 years old, he was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. Admiral Halsey gave the eulogy, spoke about courage, sacrifice, innovation. The newspapers called him a hero. The Navy called him an asset. Admiral Hargraves sent a formal condolence letter to Vance's family. He did not attend the funeral. 20 years later, the Washington was scrapped in 1961, cut apart for metal. The radar masts that had seen through darkness. The guns that had sunk Hiroshima. The bridge where Vance had made the hardest choice of his life. All of it melted down. The proximity fuse became standard for all anti-aircraft ammunition. It's estimated to have saved 20,000 lives during the war. Radar became the foundation of modern naval warfare. Fire control, navigation, search. Everything Marlowe had predicted, and Nathaniel Vance was quietly forgotten. No ships were named after him. No monuments built. The textbooks mentioned him briefly, if at all. Just another officer who did his job. But the men who served with him remembered. Billings, Montana. 2024. Hank Dalton sat in the sunroom of the nursing home staring out at the mountains. He was 102 years old. One of the last living veterans of Iron Bottom Sound. Maybe the last who'd served on the Washington. The journalist young woman couldn't be older than 30, sat across from him with a recording device. "Mr. Dalton, what do you remember most about Admiral Vance?" Hank was silent for a long moment. "He taught me that being right and feeling right aren't the same thing." "Can you explain?" "The night we sank the Hiroshima, 78 men died on our destroyers. We could have helped them earlier, could have engaged sooner, but the Admiral held back, kept us in the dark where the radar worked best. That must have been hard. It was murder, that's what some people said afterward, sacrificing the destroyers to save the battleship." "What do you think?" Hank looked at her directly. "I think if he'd done anything different, 2,000 men would have died instead of 78. Including me. The Admiral chose the lesser tragedy. That's not murder, that's mathematics. But it still bothered him. Every day I saw him that night. After the battle, he'd memorized all 78 names, their ages, their hometowns. He carried that weight until he died." The journalist made notes. "Do you think he made the right choice?" "I'm sitting here, 82 years later, because he did, so yes. But I also think it destroyed something in him. You can't make choices like that without paying a price." "What price did he pay?" Hank gestured to the empty room. "Nobody remembers him. Halsey's got ships named after him. Nimitz has a carrier. Vance, nothing. The Navy buried him quietly and moved on." "Why?" "Because he made them uncomfortable. He fought the system, proved that old ways were wrong. The Navy doesn't like people who prove them wrong." The journalist leaned forward. "If you could say one thing to people about Admiral Vance, what would it be?" Hank thought for a long time. "That he taught me the most important lesson of my life. In darkness, don't trust your eyes. Trust what you know. About radar, about everything. When you can't see clearly, when the world is chaos, when you have to make impossible choices, don't guess, calculate, think. Use the information you have, even if it comes from a machine nobody believes in." That's what radar was. Radar was proof that being blind doesn't mean being helpless. The Admiral couldn't see without those thick lenses, but he saw better than anyone because he learned to see differently, not with eyes, with mind. Hank looked out at the mountains again. 78 men died that night. 1,922 lived. The Admiral made that math, and even though it was right, it haunted him until his heart gave out. Do you think he had regrets? I think he had exactly one, that he couldn't save everyone, but he saved who he could, and in war that's all anyone can do. The journalist turned off her recorder. "Thank you, Mr. Dalton. You're going to write about him?" "I'm going to try." "Good. He should be remembered. Not as a hero. Heroes are easy. As a man who chose right even when right felt wrong. That's harder. That's rarer. After she left, Hank sat alone in the sunroom. He'd never told anyone this. But after the battle, he'd found something in Vance's cabin. A letter. Unsealed. Addressed to Captain Marlowe, who'd been dead for 3 years. Hank had read it. Dear Captain Marlowe, you told me to trust calculation over instinct. Tonight I did. I let 78 men die so that 1900 could live. The mathematics are sound. The tactics were correct. The outcome was optimal. So why do I feel like I failed them? You taught me that vision isn't about eyes, but you never taught me how to live with what I see when I close them. I see their faces, all 78, and I'll see them every night for the rest of my life. Is this the price of being right? Is this what you meant when you said, choose right, even if it costs me everything? If so, I understand now. And I'd make the same choice again. But God, it hurts. Respectfully, Nathaniel Hank had resealed the letter and left it where he found it. As far as he knew, no one else ever read it. Now, 82 years later, he was the only one who knew it existed. The only one who knew that the man who'd saved 1900 lives had been destroyed by the 78. He couldn't. That was the real story, not the radar, not the sinking of Hiroshima, not the tactical brilliance, the cost of being right in a world that demanded impossible choices. Hank closed his eyes. Outside, the Montana sun was setting. And somewhere in the darkness, he imagined an old battleship's radar sweeping through the night, still searching, still seeing, still trying to save everyone, even though it never could. Annapolis, Maryland, 2024. At the United States Naval Academy, midshipmen still studied a case file labeled Night Battle of Guadalcanal, Vance Doctrine, not because he was famous, because he was right. The doctrine had 3 principles. 1. Information dominance wins wars. See first, strike first. 2. Trust data over instinct when data is superior. 3. Accept that the right choice often feels wrong. Mathematics over emotion. The instructors taught it without sentimentality. This is how you fight in the dark. This is how you save the maximum number of lives. This is how you win. They didn't teach the cost. That lesson the midshipmen would have to learn for themselves. Arlington, Virginia, 1951. Admiral Cornelius Hargrave died on a Tuesday morning in March. His obituary mentioned 48 years of distinguished service, 3 combat deployments, numerous decorations. It did not mention that he'd been wrong about radar, or that he'd spent the last 6 years of his life quietly funding scholarships for enlisted sailors to study electrical engineering. A private penance, never publicized, never explained. In his desk, his family found a stack of letters, all addressed to Captain Nathaniel Vance, all unsent. The first one, dated December 1941, began, "You were right about Pearl Harbor." The last one, dated August 1945, began, "I'm sorry I never said this while you were alive." His wife burned them all. Some reconciliations come too late.